Lumity is totally canon confirmed. Signed, sealed, it's happening, everyone. My name is Tom, and it's awesome that we're seeing a story like this about two girls who are crushing on each other and seeing that young love bud into reality. For those of you who might not understand why that's important, it's understood that crushing and dating is not only age appropriate, but an important part of coming of age stories. So it's never been uncommon to see this between male and female characters in children's media, but this is the first mainstream example that I know of children's media showing two young characters having that dynamic and they're both the same gender, because for some reason it's appropriate in one case and not in the other. In my own experience, growing up bisexual, I felt extremely pressured to repress any feelings that were not heterosexual, because being a preteen or teenage boy and having a crush on a girl my age was not only accepted, but highly encouraged, both by real-life social expectations as well as the stories that were made for my demographic. Having feelings for the same gender, though, that was treated as extremely taboo and not age appropriate, which is extremely screwed up when you think about it. But also, I'm not gonna lie, with my preferences, it was not really that hard to just tell myself I was straight and repress everything else, even if that did cause some level of internalized self-loathing. So for me, why was having crushes on girls at that age seen as innocent, while having crushes on boys seen as not so innocent? So much so that I was so ashamed of that part of myself that I wasn't even willing to accept it, let alone come out, until I was almost an adult. Even after society started widely condemning homophobia, which was not a thing in the 2000s. Homophobia was very normal. Like, more normal than just a thing that happens. It was the default to be openly homophobic until around the 2010s. And I honestly attribute a lot of the shame I felt about the fact that I knew I wasn't straight to the fact that representation of gayness in media was almost exclusively done in adult media that I was probably too young to be watching, and they portrayed it as something that was intrinsically degenerate. And usually as a joke. And not even jokes that resonate with the struggle of being gay, more so jokes about how disgusting and bad it is to be gay, which as a kid made it feel impossible to accept that part of myself when I so closely associated it with that negativity. I couldn't not feel like there was something wrong with me. Even as it became more socially accepted, those perceptions still stuck with me until I was old enough and had enough real-life experience in LGBT+ spaces to separate those stigmas from reality. Although, part of that also came from changes in how we were portrayed in fiction. For example, as much as you can criticize the fact that Legend of Korra waited until the last minute to vaguely reveal the relationship between Korra and Asami, it had a life-changing impact on me. Having Korra, a character that has many traits that I identify with, turn out to be bisexual was a huge factor in making me feel comfortable in accepting that I myself was bisexual. That being said, if there was a show like The Owl House when I was growing up that showed characters my age who are the same gender catching feelings for each other and having it be treated with the same innocence and respect that the heterosexual equivalent gets, that would have given me a much healthier perception from the beginning and made that whole journey much easier all around, which is exactly why it's so important that these stories are being told now. I am ecstatic that thanks to the Owl House, there's a generation of kids like me who are not going to have to deal with the same self-loathing and shame that I did, or at least they'll have a much easier time overcoming it. But as much as I recognize how impactful this story is, it's thanks to the work that came before it that we are able to see it happen in the first place. Ever since that episode of The Owl House aired, I've been seeing a lot of people attacking shows like She-Ra, Steven Universe, and the many examples of queer representation in cartoons before, when it's because of those landmarks that we are able to see The Owl House as is. Just as a disclaimer, I need to preface this by saying that when I talk about lesser examples of representation, I'm not talking about queerbaiting or burying your gays or any tropes that do more harm than good. I'm referring to examples that left more to be desired, and in a perfect world would have had more attention, better development, and been more fleshed out. I've also seen pushback against the attitude of ragging on other shows as a way to praise The Owl House, which is good, but I also understand where that attitude is coming from. I understand why some might not be satisfied with representation of the past, especially if you don't have the full context for why that representation wasn't more explicit. First of all, The Owl House is doing a lot of great things even outside of Lou's and Amity, so there is no reason to tear down other shows to elevate The Owl House when it can easily stand on its own merits. But more prominently, to discredit the progress made by other stories shows an incredibly short-sighted lack of appreciation for the battles those creators fought to change the portrayal of queer characters in media, normalize this, and how much things have changed just in the last 5 to 10 years because of that. For perspective, let's look at Dana Terrace herself. Before she was the showrunner for The Owl House, she was a storyboard artist on Gravity Falls, a show where the LGBT representation was very limited, but that wasn't by choice. Series creator Alex Hirsch says Disney forbade him from portraying any explicit LGBT+ crap, with even implications being met with notes from Disney saying it was inappropriate for the channel and needed to be revised. And even in reference to Yal House, Alex has said that they would have never been able to do what they're doing now back during Gravity Falls, but of course he's still happy that they can now. Of course, that was Disney Channel. On other networks, things were different, but not much. On Nickelodeon's end, at the time of Legend of Korra, they were very supportive of Korrasami, or at least as supportive as you can infer. Brian Konietzko confirmed that they got the green light from the network to make the ending gay, just not too gay. They could be gals, but the pals part had to be kinda open-ended. Then even with Adventure Time, where bubbling was all but confirmed in the way the relationship between the two characters was written by Rebecca Sugar back when she was on the show, they only made it official after Steven Universe had already been changing the game. Which leads us to Steven Universe, where Rebecca Sugar had to fight to get representation into the show, especially the wedding between Ruby and Sapphire. It wasn't a case of the network saying, oh boy, a show about lesbian space rocks? So progressive, we love it! Steven Universe had extremely explicit representation for a children's cartoon at that time, and that was thanks to the fact that Rebecca Sugar was willing to go out on a limb and make that a priority and fight to keep as much of it in as possible, minimizing censorship and making a story that incorporated LGBT+ characters and their relationships with too much prominence to ignore, which definitely made it easier for creators like Noelle Stevenson to do the same at Netflix with She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, being very explicit with queer representation, but even that wouldn't have happened without Noelle campaigning and fighting for it to happen. The point I'm trying to make is all of these instances of representation were not easy to get into the shows in the first place. So to look at the Owl House and say this is a better example of representation is a true statement, but it's also redundant. Creators did not have the same freedoms to tell stories that reflected their lived experiences or the experiences of their queer audience as they do now. If you wanted to make a character that was more than queer-coded and to make them and their experiences with their identity an integral part of your story, then your hands were tied. You just were not allowed to do that. Even in the case of the Owl House, I know for a fact there is no way that Dana didn't fight to get this far. But my point is, her battles against censorship are built on the battles that have taken place before. It's not a case of this person cared more or fought more, it's the fact that creators now are fighting from a different starting point. Fighting for representation in a world where there have now been multiple success stories for queer media is going to yield different results than fighting in a world where even confirming that your characters are gay outside of the text is a crazy and bold statement. And even if you are in a situation where the best you can do is drop hints and say in an interview after the fact that yeah, your characters were gay, it's better to do that and push things a little bit than decide it's not good enough and leave things as they are. Think of that line in the Boondocks that everyone loves to quote. What do you do when you can't do nothing, but there's nothing you can do? You do what you can. You want to put your main character in a relationship with her projected girlfriend, but the network will only let you end the finale on an open-ended hint? Then you do that. You want to portray a budding relationship between two queer characters, but you can't explicitly say that's what's happening, and you don't know if you ever will. You write that budding relationship anyways. Then maybe down the line there will be a showrunner that fights to push things a little bit further and gets to show queer characters have their budding relationship and get to say yes, that is what's happening. Maybe a showrunner will be able to fight to have their on-screen wedding and win that battle. Then after people who care enough about progress over perfection put their ideas out there in any way that they can, you will see media that gets to tell the stories for queer kids that tell them that there is nothing wrong with them, that they are allowed to feel just as normal as anyone else, and stories that tell kids who aren't queer that there's nothing wrong with people who are. And then once that story is done, there will probably be another one that comes along that will have the opportunity to do more, which is what matters. A small difference today can make a bigger difference tomorrow. But you only get there from people who care enough to take the chance for victories of any magnitude along the way, even if those victories feel compromised. The silver lining is the fact that we have the privilege to look at Korrasami, look at Bubbling, look at Steven Universe, or even look at She-Ra in the Princesses of Power, and be able to call it lackluster because better mainstream representation is happening. But don't forget or lose appreciation for the fact that it can only happen because people cared enough to take whatever steps they could along the way. But as always, we want to hear what you think. Let us know in the comments down below, or find us across social media at Roundtable Vids, or find me on Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, all at TommyPQM. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the Roundtable and hit the bell for notifications to never miss a video. As always, my name is Tom. I hope you have an awesome day, and I'll see you next time. See ya!